At T-Mobile, our critical mission is providing unparalleled 5G coverage for when connectivity is mission critical. Introducing T-Priority, America's best 5G network experience for first responders, even in times of congestion. More capacity, faster speeds, better coverage. T-Priority from T-Mobile, built for tomorrow's emergencies, ready today. Discover more at t-priority.com.
For qualifying organizations on eligible rate plans, coverage not available in some areas and may be impacted by emergencies.
This episode is brought to you by Prime Video. In the small town of Holland, Michigan, nothing is ever what it seems. Behind the tulip festivals and pretty houses lay dark secrets that threaten to tear a marriage apart. Nicole Kidman stars in this darkly twisted thriller about a wife and mother whose quest to uncover her husband's secrets may get her more than she bargained for. Holland, streaming on Prime Video March 27th.
Welcome to the Parent Footprint Show with Dr. Dan. I'm Dr. Dan Peters, and you're listening to the Parent Footprint Show, a weekly broadcast where our mission is to make the world a better place, one parent and one child at a time. At Parent Footprint, we believe the key to raising happy, healthy, and engaged kids is for parents to be happy, healthy, aware, and engaged themselves. Each week, our show will teach parents, families, educators, and caregivers how to parent with purpose and to leave their best footprint for the next generation. We'll talk to top parenting experts, doctors, therapists, authors, and of course, parents to gain information about how to parent with increased awareness and how to be purposeful about leaving a healthy footprint on our children. Welcome to today's show, where the topic is raising creative kids. We are going to be talking with Dr. Susan Daniels, my good friend and colleague. Dr. Daniels is co-founder and educational director of the Summit Center, as well as professor of educational psychology and counseling at California State University, San Bernardino. At Summit Center, Dr. Daniels provides differentiated education plans for children and adolescents and consults to help kids reach their potential in the classroom and life. Dr. Daniels is an internationally recognized expert in the field of gifted education and creativity with numerous publications and presentations at educational and psychological conferences. She specializes in the social and emotional development of gifted children and adolescents, intensity and sensitivity of gifted individuals across the lifespan, and the development of creative potential. Susan is co-author of Raising Creative Kids, which I've had the privilege of doing with her, and co-editor and co-author of an amazing book called Living with Intensity. Susan, welcome to the Parent Footprint Show. How are you?
Hi, Dan. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course. The first question I'd like to ask you is, how did you get into creativity, and why has nurturing creativity in children become your life's work?
Well, Dan, I was thinking about that, and there are several markers along the way in my adult development, but it took me back to my own childhood. And I grew up in a blue-collar neighborhood, solid home, but not a lot of resources. And I have to give credit to my mother. She recognized creativity in me. I passionately loved theater, and she took me to a dinner theater that had professional children's theater on the weekends. And I performed in school plays, and I got this idea that I really wanted to perform in these plays at what was called the Drury Lane Theater. So she helped me put together a resume on notebook paper with a photo booth picture and a list of the plays that I had been in at the school and a cover letter. And I sent it off, and about 3 weeks later, I was home from school because it was spring break, and my mom said, I'm going to say this, don't ever call me this. My mom said, Susie, Vernon Schwartz is on the phone. And I knew who Vernon Schwartz was because I read the playbills backwards and forwards. I said, oh my gosh, what? And she said, he's talking about auditions. He wants to know how tall you are. I said, well, how tall does he want me to be? And she said, come on. I said, no. I could wear your high heels or I could slouch. And so to make a long story short, she took me to the theater for a reading and an audition the next day. And here I was, an 11-year-old, living on the south side of Chicago, pretty near an area of industrial, stuff. And I started doing professional theater when I was 11. And we now know in research that having those extracurricular activities and those passions lead to success and happiness later in life. So it really was a crystallizing and very significant moment for me.
That's a great story and so appropriate to what we're talking about today with raising creative kids. Your mom helped get you that opportunity, which set the course for your life.
Right. Creativity has been a huge part of my life.
This creativity, we've discussed this a lot. People use creativity a lot. They use the term a lot. We like that it's being used a lot. We like that people are using it in business and trying to use it in school. But what actually does it mean? What is creativity?
Well, it's a fuzzy concept, and it's a little hard to nail down. And there are many slightly different perspectives and definitions. But the definition that I go back to most often comes from Howard Gardner, who some people may recognize as the founder of multiple intelligence theory. Well, before he did that work, he was a creativity expert and continued to be. And his definition is that creativity is the ability to solve problems or fashion products that are both novel and purposeful. And he elaborated that and spoke to the need for not just novel but purposeful. He said, I could stand on my head and give the rest of my talk, and that would certainly be novel, but it wouldn't necessarily be purposeful. But, there's a contextual element, too, because when I'm teaching undergrads, and sometimes I see, maybe I've been talking a little too long, which I try not to do. I try and have activities. If I stood on my head and continued giving a little mini lecture, it probably would be purposeful because everybody would go, what the heck is she doing, and pay attention, So anyhow, that's the working definition that I'll use, and I think it's the one that's most adaptable across ages and across domains. But to really understand creativity, Dan, we need to talk about the 4 C's of creativity, and I'd like to touch on those briefly, if you don't mind.
I love the 4 C's. I think they're critical in helping parents look at what does this continuum of creativity look like?
Right. So I'm going to start with the boldest, most obvious form of creativity, and we call that big C creativity. That's eminent creativity, like Leonardo da Vinci, and recently in one of my presentations I included Lucille Ball, of all people. Isn't that an interesting pairing, Leonardo da Vinci and Lucille Ball? But you know what?
They would make an interesting couple.
I know, that would be an interesting dinner to have them, too. But anyhow, they were game changers. They changed the field. So big C creativity is eminent creativity. Then there's professional creativity, which means you go to work every day and you're producing in some creative way. Now, everyone might be creative in their work. Like, for instance, I had a conversation with a pediatric neurosurgeon who said, creativity was very important to her work because she went through the surgery in her mind over and over and over again, but if she encountered something she didn't expect, she better be able to respond flexibly and creatively. But there are careers that are predominantly about creativity, and in the world that we're in today, those careers are increasing on an ongoing basis. Then there's a little C creativity, which is planful creativity, and oftentimes that's project-based. It's an individual's project. You're creating something out of wood. You're doing a play at school. It's got a plan to it, and it's got an outcome and a product. As you know, one of the types of creativity that I'm most interested in is mini C creativity, or everyday creativity. And as an aside here, I should say that Piaget, who was an eminent child developmentalist in the 20th century, said that all learning is creative. And if you think about it, it fits our definition. If a child's learning something, then what they're learning is new to them, meaning it's novel. And if it's productive learning, then it's purposeful. So mini-C can include play, dabbling, being flexible, learning new material. It's as you know, one of my colleagues talks about micro moments of creativity. There doesn't have to be any huge planning or special supplies necessary. It's about looking at things differently and responding with a zest and passion and an imagination in the moment.
Well, and for our listeners, particularly our listeners that have younger children, they're really living in mini C and little c, right? That's on the continuum. Those are the things that they might be experiencing or seeing every day from their kids? Yeah,
absolutely. I just did a couple of presentations at a conference with new material, and it's not all of it was new, but some of it was just reframing some of the things that you and I have talked about before. And that's that I had several pictures of kids just doing stuff, and one of the things that we've talked about is that young children are naturally creative. They explore, they wonder, they design, they craft, they pretend. Pretend is huge. Pretend implies, what if? How about if I do this? Could we do this? What might it look like if I turn it upside down? And so they're very naturally involved in creativity. Unfortunately, though, there's been consistent research that about fourth grade, creativity tends to dwindle. And we don't know the reason for that exactly, but we think it's twofold. One is the kids become more self-conscious just developmentally with the way their brains and their social interactions are going. And then the other is the curriculum becomes a lot more rigid and doesn't have the early childhood methods that somewhat naturally encourage creativity.
And something you and I have talked about a lot, particularly when we were thinking of writing the book, was you were teaching me about the vast world of creativity when my world of creativity or my thought about creativity was, it's coloring and it's painting. And it's arts and crafts. And right. Particularly these days, I think if you can say a little something to our parents and our listeners of the vast and varied ways that we see kids exhibit creativity. It's vast.
Yeah, well, and one of the things we talked about is, so what does creativity look like in kids? Is it kind of universal or are there different kinds? And my response to that has to be both and. I think there's sort of in intelligence theory, we used to talk about G, which was like a general intelligence, and then there were specific areas of intelligence. I think that sort of applies with creativity. I think there's a sort of general creativity, and then there's specific creativity. In other words, most forms of play and imagination and invention and design have creative aspects to it. But creativity can also be honed and focused by specific area or domain. And you may have some kids who are really interested in understanding design and building and et cetera, and they may be interested in engineering or architecture, right? You may have some kids who are interested in devising experiments. Some kids who love writing and illustrating stories. We've had a number of those kids all of these kids come to Summit Center, but I know, one of our young clients came every week with a different illustrated book as a gift,
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting, some of the profoundly gifted kids that we've worked with who also had creative talents. I'm thinking of one young man who was extraordinarily talented at playing high levels of piano music, but he wasn't particularly creative. Whereas there was another young woman who was technically really good, very advanced, but she was also loved jazz and loved improvising, So there are some aspects of creativity that apply across different areas, but they manifest in different ways depending on where it's being applied. Does that make sense?
It does. And, parents are asked to focus on so many things these days, right? Focus on school, focus on sports, focus on social life. Why is it important for parents to be aware of creativity and cultivate creativity in their children?
Okay, well, you know what? I didn't realize this when we were looking at questions before, Dan, but you really set that up well with the phrase aware of creativity. Because one of the things that we know about people, first of all, there are two kinds of people in the world. No, I'm just kidding. But there's a lot in between. But let's say there are kids who just kind of seem to come wired to be really strong divergent thinkers and very imaginative, and they're kind of just innate creative beings. And then there are other kids who dabble and or can learn and be fostered to be more creative. And one of the things that we know about creativity is that people who are most naturally creative are very aware of creativity, both in themselves and in the world around them. And that's something that can happen innately, but it's also something that can be fostered. So, like, for instance, if you've got a child who's really interested in nature, and as parents, you take them on nature walks, every week or once or twice a month, and you take a field book with you and you stop and you identify the different flora and fauna, you're nurturing that passion and that ability in loving the environment. Well, if you as an adult are aware of creativity and the nature of creativity, and you notice creativity in the environment, and you maybe even spend some time developing your own creativity, then you're bringing it to your child, you're bringing it into the realm of your family, and it's a more natural way to nurture creativity and likely enhance the creativity of your kids and yourself. So awareness is key, Dan. That's my point. Awareness of creativity is key, and you don't have to be an expert in creativity to see things around you that are creative, or to go, look at that, that's a cool invention, I wonder who thought of that. How is that made? Why is that designed that way? What if it was something different? So
you're saying that encouraging creativity then does require parental awareness. Like, you have to be looking at it or have it as a goal, as a parenting goal?
I believe so. I mean, Dan, parents have been parenting kids for years without necessarily having explicit instruction in, like our book, Raising Creative Kids, but it sure helps. Parents can innately kind of be inclined to support their children in their ideas and in their desires for building or constructing or creating. But the more that we know about creativity, the more we can do to nurture it in ourselves and our children and just enjoy it in the world around us.
Support comes from ServiceNow. We're for people doing the creative work they actually want to do. That's why this ad was written and read by a real person and not AI. You know what people don't want to do? Boring, busy work. Now with AI agents built into the ServiceNow platform, you can automate millions of repetitive tasks in every corner of your business, IT, HR, and more, so your people can focus on the work that they want to do. That's putting AI agents to work for people. It's your turn. Visit servicenow.com.
Can you feel it in the air? That sudden shift of mood? It's the perfect time to shed the winter blues and experience the revitalizing qualities of driving a Lincoln. It starts with the Lincoln Spring Sales Event. So step outside and visit your local Lincoln retailer or Lincoln.com for some seriously mood-enhancing offers on current and past Lincoln models. Your transformation awaits. Learn more at Lincoln.com.
Experience a progressive lens engineered with AI from Essilor, powered by individual measurements of your visual behavior. A lens personalized to you by an Essilor expert. Discover Verilux XR Track and enjoy instantly sharp vision in motion and seamless transitions from near to far. Find your local Essilor expert today at Essilor.com.
And there are characteristics of creativity. You said one of them is that creative people are actually aware of creativity, which sounds interesting, but so they actually are aware of it. What are other characteristics that parents should look for or might notice in creative kids?
Sure. Independent thought.
They don't like that, though, right? Independent thought, doing things their own way?
Yeah, well, wait till you hear my next few. Okay, so I've got independent thought, insight, as in ahas. Oh, look at that. This could be like this. Let me try that. Novelty, which was in our definition, and it's a form of independence, wanting to do things differently. And then, a significant imagination. And so these are wonderful characteristics, and they can really be annoying to parents and teachers.
Yes.
So my sort of punchline about that is you want to facilitate kids with testing boundaries, pushing boundaries, trying things differently, and you're the parent and you get to say, no, not so much, we're not going to do that one, if that makes sense. So we want to positively nurture independence and novelty and imagination. Provide environments that allow for positive expression of those qualities.
You're bringing up a really good point. So creativity can have positive and manifest in a positive way or a negative way. It's still creativity, right? So when I think of when you see these kids who are being creative, but it's not necessarily in positive ways, rather than just dropping the hammer and punishing and consequences, we might want to couple that with sort of turning the ship a little. Yeah, redirection.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The example that comes to mind for me is graffiti.
Right.
And graffiti from most people's perspectives would be considered destructive. But there are some kids that are incredibly talented graffiti artists.
Another example you talk about, I'm thinking, which I know ended up being very big C in a big way, is Jim Carrey. But before he was big C, he had to be in school, which was interesting, right? For people around him.
My understanding is Jim Carrey was a very difficult student.
Yes.
And there was a plan in place to really control his behavior. And this was a short version. His homeroom teacher said, "Look, I want you to be able to stay in your regular classroom and stay here and be with me, but I'm willing to set things up for you here. I'd like to offer you homeroom on Fridays for the Jim Carrey show, but the rest of the week you need to pull it together." So that's a very brief story of how it went, but the story goes that it did go. It worked, and we know what it led to. And we can certainly see if we look at some of our more, especially I think those who do physical comedy, who are really expressive with their bodies, and doing gags and strange acts and the like, that can be a real challenge at home and at school. But again, I don't think you want to eradicate it. I think you want to negotiate with it and with your child to find a positive outlet.
So, what would you say is the hook for parents to why focus on creativity? How does it enhance their child's life and their family's life? What's the hook?
Well, there's been a plethora. There's been just a growth of research on creativity. And there's a book called The Creativity Cure. And it's written by a psychiatrist who's married to an orthopedic surgeon who specializes in the hand. And he did research on, and just as part and parcel of his work, the need to make, the need to use your hands in purposeful activity to create something. And so their book is about how being creative enhances well-being in everyone. And there's been a lot of research in positive psychology that indicates that creativity as a part of development aids overall healthy and positive development. So, and for parents, there's research that engaging in creative activity throughout our lifetime expands and increases the quality, expands our longevity and increases the quality of our lives. So we can't be doing anything but good in nurturing this in our children.
So it's actually healthy. Nurturing creativity is healthy, is what you're saying.
It is. It is. And one thing I want to make sure that I get is, get to here is you asked about how a parent can foster creativity. You asked one thing, and of course I can't just say one thing. So
I want to know one thing. I want to know one thing.
It is one thing. I fixed it. I have a three-part approach. I have a three-part
You
approach.
always find a way to make things more complex.
That's right.
Go for it.
Creative people like to make things more complex. So first of all, being aware of creativity and embracing novelty. That's one thing. Second thing is offering choices and opportunities. Asking the child what they want to do. Having creative play dates for families. Where are we going to go? What are we going to do? What are we going to try? And last but not least, if it's possible, anywhere in the house, to have like a studio-type workspace where there are materials that can be used for art, for science, for building, for design, for writing, for, whatever sparks the child's or children's interests.
I love the idea of choice. That really is now we're hitting on different parenting models, right? How much choice do we give kids? And maybe this goes back to what we're finding in schools as kids get through the grades, more and more through the grades, second, third, fourth, they actually have more or less and less choice of what they're doing and more standards and expectations.
That's right, and that's why we think we see that dip by fourth grade. So since the kids aren't getting choices in school, it's more paramount that they get real choices at home. Not are you going to clean the living room or do your homework first, but real choices about real work and activities that they want to do.
So are you saying that if one is to foster creativity and give choice, does one need to be able to deal with messes and ambiguity?
Yes, the exploration and the invention and the try out and try on aspects of creativity do tend to be messy. And so we need to be able to tolerate a bit of a mess and tolerate some ambiguity, and also, when it's appropriate, ask that our kids clean up, because creativity doesn't mean necessarily, leaving the state of disarray.
I think parents would appreciate the second part, for sure.
Yeah. If you can confine it to like a studio workspace, where they know they can go and make messes, that's awesome.
Okay, well, it's now the time for the part of the show where we ask our guests for their parent footprint moment. And the parent footprint moment is thinking back on a time where you became aware of something about yourself or your parenting situation with your child, and because of that awareness, your child benefited.
Yes, I'd like to speak to that very much. So, I'll admit, I was a single parent, not always, but from the time my son was about 7, and I was working on a PhD, and I was working in the schools as well. So I would come home, and I'd be all about cooking dinner, but my head was somewhere else, sort of processing my day. Well, my son would come home, and he was very extroverted and very chatty, and then, and how about? And I'd say, Devin, Mommy just needs to focus on dinner right now. Can you just sit down for 10 minutes, and let me finish this, and then you can have my undivided. And a light bulb went on for me, because I realized, what's important here? My son really wants to talk to me about what's important to him. And I managed to center myself, little moment of meditation, and sit down and be with him. And that was good for his stress levels. He'd come home kind of, wired after school, and we'd talk about different ideas he had. And we did the same thing around his creativity. When he had a big aha idea, I would make time to sit down and be thoroughly present with him and go, oh, think of that, and how are you going to do this, and what are you going to do next? So I asked him questions rather than saying, oh, that would be great, why don't you do this or do that? I made myself available to listen so that he could talk through his ideas.
And I think the key part of that, which is totally aligned with the mission of Parent Footprint, is you became aware in the moment that you needed to be present for him.
That's absolutely right. I'd agree with that completely.
From that awareness, it allowed you to ask all the questions, focus on him, and actually do what you are an expert in, is actually cultivate his development and his creativity, because you actually had time to see where he was at and to ask him questions so he could be guided on his own exploration and share his life with you.
And so often, if we just look to the children, they give us indicators. They know what they need next. Not always, but often,
Susan, thank you for sharing your expertise with us. You are truly an expert in creativity, and it is so important how you talk about nurturing creativity is healthy. It supports wellness across the lifespan. Thank you very much for being a part of the show. For you listeners who want to learn more about Dr. Susan Daniels, to learn about her books, her presentations, her trainings, and the new book that she's working on about visual teaching and learning, you can find her at www.insightresources.org. And to access her, to learn more about her consulting services for creativity and creative plans for students, children, and families, you can reach her at www.summitcenter.us. Thank you for listening to the Parent Footprint Show with Dr. Dan. The show is sponsored by Parent Footprint. To learn more about Parent Footprint, please go to www.parentfootprint.com. To contact us, you can contact us at podcast@parentfootprint.com. And as we will leave you to go out into the world with this one question: what footprint do you want to leave?